The Daily Raz Show with Jack Wilson.
Okay, here we go. I wanted to come in today and talk about something that, I heard Donald Trump talking about on, he's always bringing Social Security up and Medicare. But anyway, it's like, what about Social Security? I mean, really, does anyone really know about it? So I began looking at it, and it's a pretty important thing for many retired people. Yeah, Social Security started back in 1935, 1936 by Roosevelt, and it was after the Depression. It was really to protect the elderly and people that were in poverty. They had nothing. There was nothing at that time. Basically, before Social Security, people lived on their savings, what they could put away in a mason jar, I guess. Banks. That was after the Depression. Banks were, for the most part, failed, but they lived on. If they had pensions, for lucky enough to have pensions or savings. Other than that, they had to rely on family, friends, whatever. So, Roosevelt, of course, he did many things, during those Depression years, but that was one of them, and it's still with us today, thankfully, because that is, what many people live on, is Social Security. The following years, after that, they were encouraged to buy homes, save money. Banks then were protected, and to prepare for retirement. And, after they retired then, again, the main thing people did at that time, middle income, was that their big investment was their home. And that was their protection going into retirement, because then hopefully their mortgage would be paid off. So, they could live on Social Security, what they were able to save. And the home was, was really their biggest investment. If they were fortunate enough to have pensions, that would have been something else. But, some companies did have pension plans. Governments, some government agencies, state and federal, did have pensions. That kind of went away in the 80s, in the early 80s, when 401ks became popular. So it was in the 70s, I think, when it started with Carter. When Carter came in, he signed into law, I believe, the different acts to begin the 401k programs. And then they became really popular in the 80s when Reagan was in. Before that, before the 401ks, and the different investment programs that they had, for tax purposes for employees, and the contributory programs that they had. Before that, the stock market was really for institutional investors. That would be where the pension funds were at, and stocks were pretty much something that normal people did not putter around with. They didn't know anything about it. Even when they went into the 401k programs for the many different companies that came online with that, they really didn't know anything, about investing. They had to rely on investment advisors for these different companies, how to take their money and put it into their portfolio for different types of earnings, whether it was risk or not. So they really, most people didn't have the time. I mean, it's a career, a profession, investing, and they relied on companies to do that investing for them. And we all are aware that during the 80s and 90s, I mean, the investment portfolios were wiped out a number of times. So, but that's really where people had their investment. It became very costly to buy a home, so that type of investment for middle-income America was just not what it used to be in the 40s, 50s, and 60s. But as it went into the 80s and 90s, people were paying into Social Security, and Social Security, you pay in, I think, a 6.5%. The employer pays 6.5%. And then of course Medicare is 3%, and you split that. Now, if you're self-employed, then you're responsible for the whole gig. So, that fund did well, and it actually did have surpluses for a long time. But the Social Security system has now become a pay-as-you-go because it's underfunded. There are no surpluses. The surpluses are gone. And how that happens? How does that happen? Well, it's actually become pretty commonplace now, but it began with, I believe, Lyndon Johnson tapped into and borrowed in the surpluses of the Social Security Fund, and it is a fund, for the Vietnam War. It was used to fund the war. And it's always been used by, I guess, almost every president to fund different programs. And what do? They write an IOU. I owe you $100 million. And as far as I know, the IOUs are still there. They never seem to put this money back into, so it becomes a deficit. And then the problem with that is that it's a generational problem. The people that were paying into Social Security got older and began using it. They began using it. And the youth, I guess what you could say, the youth, they pay in less. They're actually paying in less. That's to say the birth rates have gone down in the country, so the pay-in for Social Security has been less than the outgo. So how much do people really pay into Social Security? Well, the cap, let's say, the cap is I believe right now, $176,000. So if you make $176,000 in the first month of the year, you're not going to pay any Social Security tax after that, and that's fact. And if you make $200,000 a year, after $176,000, say you make $176,000 up in the first 3 months, at that point, you're not paying any more Social Security tax. And is that fair? Well, let's look at that. So the $176,000 they have paid in Social Security up to that point. I mean, even the millionaires, they still pay it into that. But how much do they collect? Okay, that's a good question. And the maximum they can collect is I think it's around $5,000 a month. Now that's like, what is it, $60,000 a year? That's pretty good money. But if you're a millionaire, it's kind of not a lot of money. But that's the max. That's the max. $176,000. I mean, if on that, and if they make $8 million a year, they're still only going to collect $5,000. If they make $1 million a year, they're still only going to collect $5,000. So that's the cap that they are going to collect. Well, why don't they raise the cap and that's been proposed a lot by politicians that want to get votes from the middle class. But will it ever happen? That's a good question, and probably not. I mean, if we look at it, it's been going on for years and years and years. They have raised it bits and pieces over the years to keep up with the cost of living, inflation, et cetera. But I mean, we're talking, instead of paying in Social Security tax on $176,000, why don't they make it $1 million and refresh the fund? In other words, well, then I guess it's a possibility. Then you'd have to look at the calculation, the formula that's used. Now you've got a millionaire that would be due maybe $50,000 a month in Social Security. Is that fair? No, it's not fair. So there's a lot of things that go on with this, and not the least of which they say, well, that if we start taxing wealthy people based on how much money they put into Social Security, then they will quit investing, they will quit being entrepreneurs. And with that, I say that's a bunch of crap. An entrepreneur is an entrepreneur, and they are, just like Donald Trump, they are autocratic. They don't want to work for someone else. They want to be in their own businesses. They're going to be in their own businesses anyway. Probably the real answer is to tax people properly and quit borrowing from the Social Security fund. That would help a lot. So do the wealthy pay their fair share of taxes? No, they really don't. You know, the tax rates, I think back in the 50s and that were like 90%. Now the effective tax rate is down somewhere around 20, 25. It's all over the place. But the uber wealthy, look, they've got accountants. They don't pay $100 to do their taxes. Their purpose is not to pay taxes, and it's legal. It's been said again and again by them. I mean, it is legal what they're doing, but they take advantage of the tax system because they can afford to. So, but do they really pay what they should be paying in taxes? No. So the thing is, tax them accordingly to participate in the benefits of the United States that they're taking advantage of. Look, I'm not against wealthy people. I think it's great, and that's what makes America great, and being able to have that advantage and opportunity to be wealthy. We all want to be wealthy. That's what brings people to this country. But at the same time, there has to be some equilibrium on fairnesses and taxes. And when billionaires and someday maybe even trillionaires are paying an effective tax rate of 3% or 8%, while the rest of America middle class is somewhere in the 24%, 25%, that's not fair. So, and again, these numbers that I'm quoting are not accurate. It depends on what your deductions are, your earnings, how good your tax preparer is. But the fact is, I guess getting back to Social Security, at one point I thought, and Bernie Sanders has even said it, but the fact is, taxing people on Social Security higher just to fulfill the fund, I don't think that's really the answer. The answer is tax them on their income, tax them on their earnings properly, and quit borrowing from the Social Security fund. And what you have borrowed, pay it back. But the fact is, this is just me talking about things in my own mind, and hopefully somebody gets something out of it. That there's been a real shift, an economic shift in the country, and it's time to actually start taking a look at it, of what's going on. the middle class built the United States. It built America. And I'd like to do a podcast later on that. But the middle class built America. And Social Security helped do that. That helped the middle class come in and be the backbone of the country. So, but it's disappearing slowly as we sit here and talk about it. And I guess another thing that we probably forget about is that Social Security was not meant to be the only income source when it was designed. It was a fallback so that people would not starve to death and be in breadlines, as it were. But it was a security measure, but it wasn't meant to be a savings account for people to put their money into and expect to retire on it. That's not what it was. Unfortunately, because, as I said earlier, a lot of the 401ks over the years have been rated 2, 3, 4 times. A lot of people lost a lot of money. And with the economies, the way it's up and down, a lot of people have lost their security, their blanket of protection that they were going to have in their retirement. Social Security, unfortunately, has become their main source of income. And that's where the problem is with a lot of baby boomers. So when they start talking about not having Social Security or getting rid of Social Security or whatever, I mean, that's crazy talk. You can't do that. And it sounds threatening, and it frightens people. It frightens them a lot. So it's a reality. Unfortunately, the Social Security fund is going to disappear because there are just not enough. As baby boomers live longer and longer, it depletes the fund more and more. It's not going to be there someday, and it's a while off. However, if you're young and are listening to anything about these podcasts, or you go to my blog, I write in depth about this on my dailyraz.com blog. And if you look at that and you're in the younger generation, 20s and 30s, pay heed and don't count on that. Don't count on that. Invest your money wisely and put it in something that's going to grow. Property. There's only so much land in the world. And that's probably one of the best investments. But however, I'm not into investment advice. That's kind of what I had to say on Social Security. And again, I do have more detail on it on dailyraz.com. I write my blogs there. I'm going to probably want to get into some of this more later on about what's going on in the government. But when I saw Trump talking about Social Security, wow, man, that's like a bells go off to people that are actually living on it. And he shouldn't be doing it, plain and simple. So I'm going to cut this off. I'm get out of here, and follow me on my blog on dailyraz.com, and come back to this again, and we'll talk some more.